Oh, I think it says I'm live. Maybe. Yep, there I go. I'm live. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? So I've decided to take a few weekends maybe and uh, do these live call-in shows. That like Atheist Experience has and Jimmy Snow has and other people do. Truth Wanted's another good show. Talk Heathen's another good show that does these call-ins, but they generally do them other days of the week. So I picked this day, Saturday, because it seemed to me to be the best time to do it. But if you guys want to call in and talk with me about either mythicism or religion, God, any kind of thing like that, please feel free to call in. I'd really be interested to hear some historicists call in to try to prove to me that, Jesus existed. We could talk about anything that you possibly wanted to. I always hate it how people are always like talking shit on the internet behind Twitter accounts and everything like that. And I figured I'd give people the opportunity to actually call me or talk to me somewhat face to face, at least over the phone, and try to defend their position. I always like going on like the line with Jimmy, and so I figure this would be interesting. Rick B says his multitasking abilities are at a deficit today. I think I'll turn the PS4 off. Drew's Book Review says, hey, I would call in if I was not working. Lol. I hope you have a good live stream. Yeah, me too. I hope that I get somebody to call in. So last night we had, had some issues last night with the internet, and hopefully we're going to be able to get that sorted out in the future. Right now it's working fine. I tested it before we went live. It was holding pretty steady, and so yeah. It looks like we got a caller. Awesome. I'm not good at buying time, so let's go to our first caller. Looks like it's from my own state, maybe. Hello, caller. How you doing?
Hey, John. This is Lisa for Truth.
Oh, hey.
I actually used to live. Hey, yeah, I actually used to live in Birmingham, but now I live in Oregon.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, my feelings about Jesus is I think he's for right now, my mind might change, but for right now, I think maybe he's a conglomeration of a bunch of quote unquote Messiah figures in the first century that just kind of got bungled all together, of course, without all the miraculous bullshit. But, so what do you think about that?
Me personally, I don't think that there was like an amalgam of different Messiah figures that got all jumbled up into one person that they called Jesus. Because everything in Paul's writings and everything in the Gospels all reflect the Old Testament understanding of the Messiah. Everything that Jesus did in the Gospels and what Paul claims that Jesus did, they all have precedent in Judaism as well as other cults around the area. And so I feel like it's just that Jesus is just another dying and rising God savior figure that has the Jewish flavor added on to it. And because they were expecting a Messiah to come and die for their sins and absolve them, it's just sort of like they co-opted these other cult ideas, and then they merged all of those sort of into one and created their own new religion based on Judaism. I do think that there are some references that you could point to for like the Gospel of Mark. There's Jesus ben Ananias, I believe it is, who died right about the time when the Jewish temple was being destroyed in 70 A.D. And there's a pretty good skeleton story there for how Mark modeled his story, at least like the passion narrative and the real meat of the gospel. I think that there's something to be said about that. There's also something to be said about the idea of these savior figures in general. I think that there's a lot of different facets that go into it. I don't think that there necessarily needs to have been like a physical, any number of physical like Messiah figures in order for the Jewish Christians to come up with their idea about their Christ.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to know your thinking on that, because you never have, not that I have heard spelled it out on your channel. So I just wanted to get your view on it.
No, I appreciate that. And I haven't made a single video like where I lay out what I actually think occurred. It's been more or less like responding to bad arguments. So I am planning on putting out some videos where I kind of explain more things that are part of at least my mythicist position, which I consider myself to take the minimal mythicist position. And I've thought about putting more videos out there where I more fully flesh that out, and so I think people might be interested in it, if anything, just to hear like what mythicists actually believe.
Okay, cool. Thanks for taking my call.
Oh, no problem. And I'm just now remembering that you emailed me about an interview, and I totally ghosted you on that, and I'm so sorry. That was not intentional whatsoever. I just got bogged down with stuff. So I'll be responding to your email soon so that we can set up a time for an interview.
It's okay. Whenever. I mean, I understand this is a crazy time for everybody.
Yeah, I hope you're staying safe out there.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Lisa. Okay, awesome first call. Off to a great start. If anybody would like to call in, try to defend God, Jesus, or just talk about anything that you want to, please feel free. Oh, looks like we got another caller who was last called in last May. Let's see who it is. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, just try to get, oh, there we go. Go straight. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
This is the Jim Tanker.
This is who?
The Jim Tanker.
Oh, Jim Tanker. How you doing, man? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. You and Casey doing all right?
Oh yeah, doing okay. Pretty much staying in most of the time. Not really going outside. Wearing masks everywhere. Trying to avoid large crowds.
Well, as an emergency manager for a COCOM, I'm kind of doing the same thing. Trying to make the stupid people not so stupid. Well, okay, so I had kind of a premise that I had come up with, not really well organized, but and as we all know, Christians aren't necessarily going to use logic and reason. But I just want to throw it out there for you, and you'll see what you think.
Okay.
All right. So both Luke and John, they both talk about how you have to hate your father, your mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, all that stuff, right? So Luke 14:26 and 1 John or 1 John 3:15, right? So then you also have where he says that if you hate somebody in your heart, it's as if you could commit a murder, right?
Yeah.
So he's actually telling people to commit murder.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole hating your father and your mother, I don't think he was being very literal about it, although you could definitely read it that way. There's also a bit of nuance there because a lot of things that people interpret from the New Testament to be just in general about people, it's more directed towards the in group of like the Jews or the Christians. Like when Jesus says, love your neighbor as you would love yourself, and the golden rule. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the actual context of that is just like other fellow Christians, and they weren't necessarily Jesus in those passages wasn't necessarily talking about just everybody everywhere. So I could see that argument being made as kind of a funny contradiction, but I think that Christians could definitely find ways around it.
He says,
go ahead.
Sorry, what he says, you have to, if anybody does not hate me, or if anyone comes to me and does not hate their mother and father, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the sixth commandment is honor your father and mother, right?
Yeah.
So again, telling them to do the exact opposite of, commandments. So,
well, yeah, exactly.
Breaking the commandment, or he's a hypocrite, which is breaking the ninth commandment of not giving false testimony.
Right.
So either way, he's committed a sin. I just kind of like to throw that out every once in a while to some people.
Yeah, no. I think it's a really good thing, because I believe that this highlights a big distinction between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God, because the New Testament God definitely comes in and he does things that are very contradictory to the Old Testament God. I think that if you were to use that as like a way to highlight the differences in the two demeanors between the God of the New Testament, God of the Old Testament, I mean, honestly, I think that could be pretty effective in demonstrating how different they are.
Right. And I was a member, by the way, and I dropped off for reasons, and I'm going to become a member again, another heathen. But
oh, that's awesome to hear. I mean, I totally understand it if people, they join and then they have to leave and they join. I mean, the memberships are there if you want them, and if you don't want all the perks and everything like that, it's really no skin off my back. I just know everybody likes, feeling part of the community and everything like that, and it's just kind of another level that you could, be in the community, I guess. But in any case, no, yeah, that's totally fine.
Well, I'll let you get on to some more calls.
Okay. I appreciate you calling in there, Jim.
Yeah, nice talking to you again. Bye.
Bye. Okay. All right. So two calls. I Longhornful, who I think had to jet out last time. Yeah, we did just start. So if you want to call in there, I Longhornful, please do. And anybody else that wants to talk about anything, obviously I'm open to it. One thing that's come up this past week is whether or not you have to be an expert in Greek in order to understand arguments, for the mythicist position that involve Greek. But it really doesn't matter if you are an expert in Greek, as long as the source that you pull your argument from, like for me, it's not only Richard Carrier, but other scholars that are also fluent in Greek. As long as your sources are formulating those arguments and they are fluent in Greek, then it really doesn't matter whether or not you speak Greek. What the person has to do is actually tackle the argument made by the other scholar that is also fluent in Greek. So let's take another caller. Apparently they called in last Saturday. It might be I Longhornful, so let's see what's going on.
Okay.
Oh,
hello, hi, John. This is I Longhorn.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for the call. And I'm not much of a debater, but I just was wondering, because Jesus' existence is all what I was saying, that its existence has been entire academia has cited existence of Jesus, right? So, but the fact that Jesus didn't exist at all, that's not a scholarly position. That's what I was trying to say. Like
Oh,
you
but it
cited
is.
arguments.
Hold on. Sorry to stop you. It is a scholarly position. There are two peer-reviewed books that examine that exact question. So it is a scholarly position to say that Jesus probably didn't exist. Not that he definitely didn't, but that he probably, and that's all I've ever asserted, is that I think that he most likely didn't exist. And that's the minimal mythicist position, which Richard Carrier has his peer-reviewed book on. And then you've got Raphael Lataster, who just put out a book targeted to academic institutions, where he examines it and he comes away as an agnostic. You also have Hector Avalos, who hasn't exactly written a peer-reviewed article or book on the subject, but he is a scholar in the community that is agnostic on the idea that Jesus existed. So it is definitely a scholarly position to say that you either don't know or think that Jesus probably didn't exist.
Yeah, but when you say that's a peer-reviewed book, I'm not sure, because there are a lot of books published by scholars themselves. Like, there are popular trust and academic works.
Oh, okay. So let me.
This is
Well, I get you doubting whether or not they're peer reviewed. So, Raphael Lataster's book, like I said, is peer reviewed. All of his books are written for an academic thing. If they're written for an academic thing using an academic press, they are definitely peer reviewed. Richard Carrier's book is published by Phoenix Sheffield Press. Or Sheffield Phoenix Press, sorry. And they have to peer review their books. They have an extensive peer review process, which includes 2 unknown peer reviewers supplied by Sheffield Phoenix Press. And so, I mean, it is definitely a peer-reviewed book where people relevant to the field of religious or New Testament studies in the history of Christianity have reviewed the book and have not found anything wrong with the content, at least enough to publish it in a peer-reviewed by a peer-reviewed publisher.
Oh, you mean for Lataster's books? Is what you're saying?
Well, no. Well, I first covered Lataster's books, who's definitely a peer reviewed. I can't recall his publisher right now, but they are targeted to academic institutions. So his are definitely peer reviewed. But also I covered Richard Carrier's book and how it was peer reviewed.
Okay. Yeah. That's okay. I think Lataster's book is peer reviewed. That's on the. Okay. Okay. But there's are you aware of a journal called Journal for the Study of Historical Jesus and things like that? Like Jesus Seminar, all these kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's on the journal named Journal for the Study of Historical Jesus. They had this reviewed. They had the Richard Carrier's book reviewed by Daniel and Gulota for Stanford University.
Yep.
So he says this is not a. I mean, I cannot post the link on the chat, right?
Well, no, you can't. But I mean, people can go out there and find Gulotta's review, and I mean, Richard Carrier has also reviewed Gulotta's review of, on the historicity of Jesus. But there's also been a few other academic reviews of it. Those are not peer reviewed in any kind of sense. They are good opinions, but Richard Carrier has also already responded to Daniel Gulotta's review on it. So if you wanted to search up his site for Daniel Gulotta, then you can go and do that and see Richard Carrier's responses to the various things that Gulotta brought up. I'm not gonna spend the time right now to go over everything, all of the problems with Daniel's review, but I mean, it's been out there since Daniel put his review up. But like I said, there's been other people that have reviewed on the historicity of Jesus. The majority of them, if I recall, have been favorable. So Daniel's is the one out of the three that was critical of on the historicity of Jesus, critical in the negative of the book.
Oh, okay. So you said Richard Carey had a rebuttal for that review, like he
responded to the review. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, maybe I will go through that.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
So
thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah. Okay. What's that?
Well, I mean,
Sorry,
I was just going to ask, like, why are we discussing the experts, like their opinions in this? Why don't we actually talk about some kind of evidence for Jesus instead of just talking about how many scholars we can pull out of our back pockets that agree with our particular positions?
Yeah, like what I was saying is that, the scholars who studies this, like historians and all, they have their own method, right? So, because I'm not a historian, I'm also an engineer, like I'm an undergrad engineer. So, like historians, when they assess something, when they assess someone, whether of their historicity, they have their own methodology, right? So they have confirmed the existence of Jesus in academic journals. That's what I was, so, I mean,
hold on.
If Richard Dawkins says, hey, Jesus didn't exist, then that's not an opinion. I mean, that's argument from authority. Like if Gandhi say Jesus didn't exist, that's an argument from authority, right? But
okay, hold on. I'm about to mute you if you don't let me talk. Okay. For one thing,
sure.
For one thing, I'm not the one that's using an argument from authority. You are the one that is using an argument from authority here. I don't know why you're bringing up Gandhi or Richard Dawkins, but I'm not the one that's bringing up irrelevant authorities. I have solidified my particular position or based my particular position in authorities that are in the field. So, like Richard Carrier, he's a historian. I do agree that historians have their method, which they analyze history and they come to probabilities as to what most likely happened. But in the field of New Testament studies, it is very flawed because you find certain criteria that are only used in these particular historical matters, being Jesus or the history of Christianity. If you were to apply the same historical method that we do to every other historical figure in history, you would see quite literally how little evidence there is for any kind of Jesus in history that matches the one of Christianity. And what you're doing is you're appealing to authority by saying, oh, well, it's already been established by the authorities that Jesus definitely existed. And so that seems to be your entire argument here. Do you actually have any kind of evidence that we could sit down and talk about that would indicate that Jesus existed in history other than the authorities?
Okay. I think you misunderstood what I was saying. Like, you like last time, I think you said I was using argument from authority fallacy, right? So that's what I was just bringing that up,
And you've been using it in this call too.
Yeah, but I wasn't using argument because when you want to cure a disease, you go to the doctor and you take that word, right? So you go to so that's not
No,
okay,
I mean,
I
mean, you understand that people get second opinions about things and that doctors regularly can contradict each other because, I mean, while they are medical doctors and they've given, the patient their opinion on it, sometimes the patient's not satisfied with their opinion and they get a second opinion on it. So, I mean, that's really a horrible analogy.
No, even if you write a research paper, you cite the journals, right? Like you go for academic peer-reviewed articles. You cite that's not argument from. Okay, maybe that's a different point. Anyway, we can go to the like the evidence as you said, right? Like
I would love to go through the evidence.
Okay, the Josephus, Tacitus, Serapion, all these writings, that's what they usually cite. Okay. I don't have anything much. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you know about? Let's just take the Josephus passage. Which
Mhm.
particular passage in Josephus?
James, the brother of Jesus, right? That's not. I don't think that there is a problem with that.
Oh no, that's definitely contested in the scholarship. There are academic journal articles. One I can't recall his name right now, but there are definitely journal articles out there that are contesting the validity of that. I mean, Richard Carrier is obviously one that contests it, and I find his argument for it very compelling.
Okay.
Do you want me to explain to you why it's not compelling?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean,
Okay,
yeah.
so in that particular passage, what we have is just this random call out to James, the brother of Christ, or who was called Christ. I believe the technical phrase is who was called Christ. Now that grammatically looks like a marginal note that could have been worked in through transcription, or somebody thought that it really should be who was called Christ rather than maybe Bendamnius or something like that. But in any case, as you go through it, what you have is you've got Josephus who mentions this particular point, and then he doesn't explain to the person what does Christ mean? What does it mean to be called the Christ? You have no explanation, no callback. Like, even if we assume that the Testimonium Flavianum was in Josephus to begin with, there's no callback to the Testimonium Flavianum when he mentions the who is called Christ. So there's an inconsistency there that seems to be better explained by an interpolation, either accidental or purposeful, in that particular spot. Another thing that strengthens this argument is that later on in that very same section, Josephus says that the brother or the Jesus Bendamnius later on assumes the role that James, who was killed, the Jesus Bendamnius is placed in that role. This is a completely new Jesus that is in just brought up right there with no explanation as to how or why they would have put Jesus Bendamnius into that particular position. So I feel that it's more parsimonious to consider it an interpolation, because if you assume that the who was called Christ was replaced with Bendamnius before, and so at the very beginning they're connecting this James to this Jesus Bendamnius, it makes a lot more sense when later Jesus Bendamnius is replacing James, who was killed. So it just seems to be a lot more parsimonious to construct it that way, rather than throw in this random call to Christ that's there.
Okay. What about Tacitus?
Tacitus. I'm so glad you brought up Tacitus, because this one is brought up a lot. So
Okay.
With Tacitus, what you have is he's writing in the 2nd century, and if you take Tacitus's mention at face value that he wrote that in there, well, considering that it's been physically determined that it's interpolation, that it said Christians, it's actually Christians, right? So that particular part is an interpolation. But if you just assume that the highly biblical verse that or portion that's in Tacitus is there at face value, then really all that does is say that Christians were in Rome in 64 CE, and that is expected on the mythicist argument, because by the early 50s, you have Paul that's writing about this Christ figure. So I mean, it makes sense that there would be Christians in Rome. Now, we could discuss the nuance of that particular passage, but what we can clearly determine is the fact that he was informed by Christians or their gospels, their holy books. The most likely source for this information would have been Pliny the Younger, who was in a neighboring province that Tacitus wrote to regularly. Pliny, he was interrogating Christians, learning about them and everything like that. There's a whole argument that uses Pliny to establish Jesus in history, but that's not really the case. He was interrogating Christians. Christians at this time would have thought of Jesus as a historical figure. And so it makes a lot of sense, Tacitus getting his information from Pliny the Younger and then writing that in there if it is actually Tacitus that wrote that portion. But there's a lot of contention around Tacitus because it's not actually mentioned until like the 4th century by Sulpicius Severus, who I always joke about sounding like a Harry Potter villain. He's the first one to mention this reference in Tacitus, but we have several different books prior to that that talk about the persecution of Christians under Nero, and it would have been a prime thing to insert into those things as tidbits of information if it existed, and they didn't. Now, this is an argument from silence, but it's a valid argument from silence because if we have evidence of people that are reporting things that would have fit perfectly in with Tacitus's report here, then I think that it's highly likely, if it were to have existed, they would have said it right there. So it's an interesting fact that nobody mentions this particular passage until the 4th century, but that's the nuance of whether or not that particular passage was interpolated. If we just forget all of that for right now and just use Tacitus at face value, it only puts Christians in Rome in 64 CE, and that's why it's not convincing.
Oh, okay.
All right.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, but to challenge, whether Jesus didn't exist or not, that's like a huge effort from your part because, I guess, because, almost all the classes, college courses, everything, like journals, they all teach that there was a man named Jesus.
Okay, again, I don't care. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I really don't care what universities teach or anything like that. And I do agree that it's a monumental task. I mean, right now, Carrier's work on this particular topic spans his entire blog pretty much, as well as a 900-page book. I can't recall exactly how many pages it is right now. I can look it up really quick. Huh?
Yeah, you mean the Carrier's book, on the historicity of Jesus, why we may have doubt. That's the one you're talking about.
Well, right. I mean, you say that it's a monumental task in order to take it on, and I would agree. Sorry, it's not 900 pages; it's 712 pages long. And I mean, he's got footnotes in it, and he explains pretty much every single facet of the mythicist position. So, I mean, it has been taken on full steam, and all the work is out there just waiting for any of these New Testament scholars to actually address the points that are being made.
Okay.
So, I mean, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this, it's that it's not that I've not researched the topic or that I'm just outright disregarding these other people without actually examining their arguments for it, right? The thing is I've examined their arguments, and their arguments just don't make sense to me. Their arguments seem to not support their conclusion.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hold on for a moment? I'm also reading stuff online also, so if you don't mind, because I see the review by Raphael Lataster on a journal for Richard Carrier's book. And of great interest. I was just skimming through.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm planning on doing this again, maybe not next weekend or something, but I do plan on doing this again. So if you want to take some time, read up on those particular reviews, read up on Carrier's arguments, and then you can come back and maybe talk again about it. That would be cool.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you for calling in. I appreciate you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. All right. Well.
All right.
Okay. So that was really good discussion with I Longhornful. I very much appreciate him calling in. Chrismer asked, why did he call you Thomas? I don't did he call me Thomas? I don't remember him calling me Thomas. All right. If anybody else wants to call in, it looks like Google sucks balls in the chat says, I'm not talking to you. I have a hint for those that are looking. There is nothing to find. I'm not sure if you're talking to me or somebody else in the chat. Maybe the Blazing Wizard Pope. I don't know. What are we looking for? Is this a scavenger hunt? Yep. It might be. I mean, honestly, I'm looking for any kind of evidence that could be out there for Jesus existing. And, I think it was for me. Yes, Godless. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, anybody that would like to call in. Oh, looks like we got a caller. Hello, you're on with Godless Engineer. How are you doing?
Hey, Godless. This is Lee, also known as Google Sucks Balls. How are you,
man? Hi, Google Sucks Balls. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. I'm not a theist, but I figured I'd call in since you had anyway right now.
Okay.
So, my position on historicism and mythicism is no one should actually choose either. We should be unconvinced on both propositions, that Jesus existed and that Jesus did not exist.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's a perfectly fine position to have. Although technically the minimal mythicist position isn't a hard, like Jesus definitely didn't exist. It's more Jesus probably didn't exist. I still think that there's a chance that he could have existed in history. I just think that the evidence kind of points in the direction of him most likely not existing.
Yeah, excellent. So you were speaking of Carrier earlier, and yeah. I disagree with his definition of like the minimal requirement. Like, for instance, he requires execution by crucifixion. I say that's very specific. Like, if the guy died of a tooth infection, he still existed.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess the reason why, like the whole crucifixion thing is that there's in Paul, he talks about Christ coming, dying, crucified, and being buried. So crucifixion is very integral to the Christian idea of who Jesus was. I do agree that he could have died in any kind of way and it could have still came up, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find any evidence that anybody died matching, Jesus's description in general.
Right on. Well, maybe it's just that I'm 46 years old and I haven't been a Christian for 30 years. So maybe I'm just so far from the topic. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's like the idea is, was there an itinerant rabbi that was a cult leader? And I think that sounds pretty darn likely. It sounds pretty darn plausible. Those guys were like a dime a dozen that time. And it seems that there was some type of cult in existence before Paul or anyone started writing about it, they never met that person. But, through oral tradition, they probably would have got the idea that, yeah, there was a cult leader. And he said a few things. We remembered some of the few things that he said. And we probably got them wrong with the telephone game too,
Okay. Do you know what ad hoc means?
Yes.
Okay.
I try to avoid those.
Well, I mean, you basically only use those right then. Because those are just baseless assertions. You don't really have any evidence to suggest.
I don't think it's baseless or ad hoc, because ad hoc would be explaining why something that's not really likely, right? Like, we know how cults pop up. We know the Branch Davidians had a David Koresh,
right?
So, I mean, it's not really ad hoc to say that cults tend to have leaders.
Well, they did have a leader, Paul. In fact, there were multiple different Jewish Christian cult sects around that time that had their own individual leaders. Paul is just the one that we know about now.
Right. So Paul latched onto something that was already existing.
Right.
So I'm talking about that which we know nothing about.
But do you understand how you saying that it seems likely, or that everything that you described about Jesus was literally an ad hoc, tacked on assumption about how it might have happened, and that would be fine if you actually had evidence to suggest that that's how it happened, but you don't actually have that. You say
I'm saying that there's a complete lack of evidence. So we look at what was common at that time. And then how would a cult pop up? It'd just be like one guy spouting some stuff. So people started following.
Oh, okay. So I'm glad that you brought that up about comparing it to other cults at the time. Do you think that there was a literal Osiris in the past?
I don't think so, but I love these things. Like, I want to know if there's like a literal King Arthur.
Okay. Well, no. Okay. So Plutarch wrote a pretty much a book, or wrote something about the Osiris cult, and basically about how the Osiris cult operated. And one of the things is that Osiris was thought to be a historical figure in the past. They wrote about him existing on Earth and everything like that. But once you get actually inducted into the religion, you find out that these are not things that actually happened here on Earth, but rather they are things that happened in the celestial realm. So, this is a cult that was operating at the same time in the first century that Paul was operating in, and everything like that. So, I mean, if we were to really talk about the commonalities of other cults that were going around at the time, then the Jesus figure being purely celestial and never actually being here on Earth does comport with all of the other cults and religions that were popular in that particular area. And so Jesus then just looks like another of these savior figures that resembles all of these other cult figures.
Well, I think you're now taking the tropes of the mythology, right? And you're saying because people applied that later, that says something about this potential person that existed before that.
Well, no. And what do you mean? What do you mean applied it later?
Okay, so like Paul, he described a celestial Jesus. He's obviously not describing Jesus, right? So
how can you make that determination that he's not describing Jesus?
Well, like, let's just go with his Damascus Road experience. Like, those things don't really happen.
I guess I'm not understanding why you think that Paul is lying to his audience right off the bat.
I'm not calling him a liar, but like, people have speculated, wild speculation, that maybe he was, maybe he had a seizure.
Okay.
I'm not denying he had an experience. I'm saying that the actual resurrected Jesus came down and talked to him did not happen.
Okay. So you're claiming that he has a false apostleship.
I feel, people can get overwhelmed when I was a Christian, I felt the Spirit of God come into me.
Okay.
You know, I also felt that at a Rush concert. You know, totally secular reason. Right. So people can have these experiences, but if we're going to talk about Jesus, I don't think it's very productive to talk about a guy that was writing mythology after the fact that never met him.
Well, right, but he's actually our earliest evidence that a Jesus supposedly existed. You don't have any evidence prior to that. So any assertion that there was a physical Jesus prior to Paul, even though Paul doesn't have a historical reference to Jesus, is an ad hoc argument for a historical Jesus.
Well, I think we can agree that, like, it sounds like we're on the same page. The evidence stops there. The trail goes cold, right? But we do know there was some type of cult in existence before Paul, and cults tend to have leaders.
Well, yeah, but that does not necessarily mean that leader was a Jesus Christ.
Well, you throw in Christ, now you're getting into some magical stuff.
I don't think so, because Christ is only a title meant as the Messiah of Judaism. So the Christ tacked onto it is not really a magical thing. It's just
fair enough.
A title.
If you just mean that his followers would have called him that, yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I put up air quotes around the Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Bit.
Gotcha.
But I mean, if you assert like you using that argument is automatically assuming that the leader would be this Christ person, but I don't see any distinction that shows that it could have
I'm
only
not assuming
been
that, right? So my position is not historicism, and my position is not mythicism. I think neither position is justified.
Well, so like I said when we started off the conversation, that I think that's a reasonable position to take, that we can't possibly know whether or not a Jesus did exist in history. But you do have to, if you're going to take that position, you don't you see as both sides as being equally possible?
Not equally possible. Like, for instance, so nothing scientific here, but let's say the answer's in an envelope. There's a magical envelope that tells us if this guy really existed or not. I get $100 if I'm right, and I'm just going to go with, hey, just like I'm going to bet on the Dodgers to win today, I'm going to go on, yeah, there was probably a cult leader. And then if I find out I'm wrong, no, there wasn't a cult leader, I'd be like, well, that's not surprising either.
Okay, so if there was a single cult leader, which I have to say, this doesn't really put you in the position of being agnostic about it. It seems like you're more in the position of historicist, because you feel like it's more likely that he did exist in history. Would that be correct?
Sure. I mean, if you got, like I wouldn't bet my life on it, you know,
but
I mean, if I had to, it's not a coin flip, and yeah, I'm 60-40 baby. So yeah.
Okay, no, that's perfectly fine, because I'm not 100% either side either. So I mean, I'm in the same position as you, except I'm on the mythicist side of this. So, but in order to come to that conclusion that it's most likely that a Jewish leader existed that started the cult, then you have to wonder, why do so many different ideas about this Jewish leader exist? Like, what's your explanation for why so many prior to Paul had varying ideas about this Jewish leader if he actually existed in history? Seems to me like if he actually existed in history, you would have some kind of way to squash or disprove certain myths about him. But what you have in the first century is this vast landscape of different ideas about this Jesus.
Well, I think the myths are separate from the reality, right? So the myths are things that like, they're tropes, and they've been added on. They've been written by people that after the fact. If we're looking at like Josephus, he's just talking about people that believed that thing, right? So, you know, of course it's going to be a little bit consistent with what those people believed, and it's no evidence at all for the guy himself.
Okay. Well, can you tell me what evidence for you pushes you over that 50-50 split?
It's just that the stories like there are a few things I'm going to take from them that are probably true. Like that it happened there and not in North America, like some really basic things. And then I just look at, maybe there was like 40 of these guys walking around ancient Galilee, and to just assume that he wasn't one of them. And they wouldn't write the story that he was like instantly celestial. He was like a regular guy that was like spouting stuff. And then they add stories of healings and walking on water. It just really makes sense. I mean, Kim Jong-un, or Kim Jong-il, shot around a golf of all holes in one, 18 holes in one, according to that mythology. Doesn't make him any less real, even though that never happened.
Okay. But you understand how that's, I mean, you suggesting that there were any number of itinerant rabbis walking around is an ad hoc assertion. And then it's a further ad hoc assertion that the person that started Christianity, it was one, a single person, which we don't have evidence for, and two, was named Jesus.
Why is it an ad hoc assertion? You don't think it's pretty well established that there were a bunch of these guys walking around?
I think that there were some of these guys walking around, but I don't think that necessarily correlates to the idea that one person started Christianity.
Correlates to, well, I mean, so we're looking at Christianity, and it came out of that environment. And then you look at what are likely ways that cults start in environments. And usually it's some guy, some guy that's pretty charismatic, good speaker, something like that. Gets a few people, tells them some ideas, something's a little bit novel, a little bit more based on tradition, whatever the Jewish tradition was in that little area. People are like, hey man, I think this guy's the Messiah, let's follow him. And I bet you that happened quite a few times. And to think that if one of these gained traction later on, that we're going to say, no, that's not how it happened, when we know like that's just a really plausible explanation.
Yeah, but you understand that there's no evidence to support that. I mean, it's fine
right.
to...
I've said that several times. There's no evidence. That's why we have... If there was evidence, we wouldn't have the question of historicism.
Well, no, I mean, I understand that, but you also have to come to terms with all of that. What that means is that everything that you just said is an ad hoc assumption about what happened.
I don't think it's an assumption, right? Because I'm not assuming I'm correct. I'm saying
you don't have
plausible.
You don't have to assume that you're correct in order for it to be an assumption. I mean,
what am I assuming? What am I assuming?
Well, you're assuming a lot of things. I mean, you're assuming that there were a lot
like one thing.
The idea that there was one person that started Christianity, that is a big assumption.
Okay, well, I don't assume that.
Okay. You don't assume that it was one person. I mean, you laid out a good argument that was an ad hoc argument, but you laid out a good argument that pretty much centered around one person standing up, talking a lot, people agreeing with him and following him and everything like that. I mean, that was pretty much your argument, was it not?
Okay, yeah, but I'm not assuming that is the case.
I mean, you're coming up with a possible explanation, and you say that this is what pushes you over the edge of 50-50.
If you look into it like 1,000 cults, you're going to find a really common thread, and it's like people meet at somebody's house, and there's some guy that lives there, and he tells them all the mythologies.
I mean, I want to go into something a little bit deeper, but I would love to hear what your citation is for that particular thing. I mean, I did not do any work to find that, because I just came up with that right now in the middle of this conversation. So. Oh, okay. All right. Well,
but, I mean, just like if you look at cults, I mean, there's always, like the Heaven's Gate cult. They show a picture of the guy.
Okay. Well, I mean, the guy, like in all of these analogies that you're using, the guy that was being followed in our particular case didn't necessarily have to be Jesus. It would have been Paul.
Right. Well, okay. So they could have gotten it wrong. Like, let's say that it's not true that there was a Jesus, right? Maybe there was a guy named Bill. I don't know. But there was somebody before Paul. It might have been like a pair of sisters. I don't know.
Okay. How does this?
I mean, do you believe that Paul actually persecuted Christians?
I mean, that's what Paul says. So,
Do you think he's telling the truth there?
I have no reason. I have no reason to think that Paul is lying. I guess in any of his epistles for the, purpose of this conversation right now.
Right. So there had to be someone there for him to persecute before he was writing about it, before he was part of it.
Well, yeah, but don't you understand how there's just because there were Christians before Paul does not mean that Jesus existed prior to that.
Well, you're asking me to make a conclusion I can't make.
I'm
not saying it means that there was a Jesus. I'm saying there was something before Paul that Paul didn't even know about. And if the stories are about some guy that walked around telling stories, that's pretty darn plausible to me.
But that's not what Paul's stories were about. Paul never mentions any of those things in all of his teachings about the Jesus character.
Okay, so he never spoke of a Jesus on earth?
No. Well, okay, so that's a bit the whole Jesus on earth thing is a bit contested right now. Me personally, I don't feel that Paul was talking about a Jesus on earth. I feel that Paul was talking about a purely celestial Jesus. And so, I mean, my point is, though, in this particular section is that Paul was, he never talked about Jesus' ministry, never talked about Jesus walking around and preaching to people. He never talked about the things that we commonly attribute to an earthly Jesus.
Okay, fair enough. Do you agree that Mark was probably the earliest of the Gospels?
Yes, written in 70 AD.
Okay. Do you think that there was probably something going around for quite a while that was that story before whoever the author of Mark wrote it down?
No, I don't, because everything in Mark maps to the Old Testament. Mark used the Old Testament in order to generate the story of the New Testament. It would be similar to who's the writer of that sparkly vampire thing?
Rice? Anne Rice?
No, sparkly vampires that took place in Oregon.
Oh, sparkly vampires. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Those movies.
Those movies. So 50 Shades of Grey originally started off as a fan fiction of those particular books, and then it turned into its own thing, right? It's a similar example with Mark. Mark used the Old Testament, the Septuagint, in order to write a new version of, basically the Jewish faith that included a Messiah figure, and it was known as Christianity.
Okay, so I'm going to agree with you that he did go back and mine and make it jive, but I mean, it seems like he was making the story of a dude jive with all of that, like a certain dude.
Well, I mean, he wrote in a very specific genre that seemed to mimic what we would think of as a biography, but that was just the way that stories were told at that point. So, I mean, I don't see that as being evidence that this Jesus person actually existed in history.
Well, I don't see it as direct evidence as much as so I don't think Mark had any evidence, I shouldn't say Mark. The author of Mark never met Jesus, probably didn't know anyone that knew Jesus secondhand. But to me, it seems like the author of Mark had access to stories about a guy that walked around and did the things that he wrote in the stories, which some of them are not described in the Old Testament.
Like which ones?
Like just saying something in front of a crowd that nobody said. in the Old Testament.
Oh, you're talking about like all like the different speeches that he had and whatnot. I'm not exactly sure about the various speeches and where they get, what the source was for them. I mean, but still,
Well, a lot of it's derivative, but a lot of it's novel. Like so.
Yeah, but this assumes that these New Testament authors couldn't have just come up with stuff on their own. How do you discern stuff that they just came up with on their own versus what would have actually been in history?
Well, I can't. Right. That's hence the reason that we're speculating.
Well, yeah, but I'm not speculating. I'm not the one that's speculating anything.
Well, if you're saying Jesus did not exist, you have a position.
Well, I did. Is that what I said?
No, but mythicists tend to say that.
Well, maybe as a shorthand colloquial, but the more accurate description of the position is most likely didn't exist. So
okay,
I'm not making a speculation about it.
Then we're not too far apart. It's like that's like I would bet on the Dodgers to win, and they would bet on the Dodgers to lose, and it's a Major League Baseball game, and it's like pretty close to 50-50 anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, I understand that. I mean, I even repeated that earlier. Meaning
that we don't have evidence of who's going to win the Dodger game tomorrow.
Okay.
But you can have an opinion on why the Dodgers are likely to win tomorrow.
Are the Dodgers
could be
playing
based
tomorrow?
on? I think they are. Yeah, they're playing today too. But
okay.
But the point is, I'm a big Dodger fan, so that's where I'm going there. But
okay.
The point is, it's like it seems like people ask for citation for things that we really just can't cite. We can have opinions on things like, hey, that pitcher has just looked good for the last few outings. Our bats have come alive recently. Good vibe with the team.
Well,
none of those things are very scientific, but like most people say, well, that's a good reason to have that opinion.
Well, but I feel like the difference here is that, I mean, you would say that you lean more towards historicity, and I'm just not willing to lean towards historicity because there's no evidence to suggest that I should. I think we're
closer together than we thought. But like the thing for me is I don't think either position should be held. And it's just when people put my feet to the fire, they call me a fence sitter. And it's like, I think everyone should be a fence sitter because there's no way to rule out that there was this cult leader. And there's no direct evidence that this cult leader did exist. So neither position should be held. Like, I'm a biology guy, right? So I look at things a little different than a history guy. But in my opinion, neither position should be held. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm fine with a pure agnostic sort of position on the question. There was a super chat that came in that asked you or said something about our conversation. Would you mind if I read that and maybe you can talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay. So Jake 4D says, the caller's hypothesis assumes these things even if he does not hold to it. It's an ad hoc explanation in terms of this idea, which I know that you kind of gone over how you don't feel like it's ad hoc, but
I reject that. Ad hoc is like trying to make something fit after the fact. And this is more like, no, these are things that we observe all the time. This is how this happens in society. This is how cults start. We have observation. And no, I haven't done the work because I didn't realize it was going to come up in this conversation. But I mean, if you just look up cults, I bet you're going to find like Jim Jones and, David Koresh. You're going to find the guy's name at the front of the article. Some guy started this cult.
Okay, and I would say that this guy in our conversation is Paul, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of these various cult leaders had a god or anything like that actually existed in reality that gave them a revelation or whatever. I think in this conversation Paul is the guy. and not necessarily Jesus. So, but it was good talking to you. Huh?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think Paul was the guy that latched on to something that was already in existence, and he's the one that blew it up. And Paul can take the credit for history, for Christianity existing today, because it would have fallen into obscurity if it wasn't for Paul, in my opinion. But yeah, hey, it was good to talk to you too, man.
Oh yeah, I hope that if we keep doing this call-in thing, that you'll call in again in the future. Not necessarily over this topic.
Yeah, I hope you get somebody that wants to prove that Jesus existed or that God exists. That'd be fun. I'm gonna keep watching. Take care, man.
All right, man. You have a good day. I'll see you later.
You too.
Okay, that was a really good conversation, I thought. I still feel like, I know that he disagrees with it being ad hoc, but I still feel like it was kind of an ad hoc thing, but we could disagree about the ad hocness of it, I guess. Hey, if anybody out there, we still got a little bit of time. I could possibly take one more caller to talk about anything if you want to. We could talk about how Christianity's false or it's not true. Somebody could repeatedly message Cameron to call in from Capturing Christianity. I doubt he'd ever call in. Oh, it looks like we got another caller. Didn't take long. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. My audio quality is really low, so I could just barely hear you say that. But I'm a Christian, and I haven't really studied this too much. I'm not an expert.
Okay.
I have the book on the historicity of Jesus.
Awesome.
But I haven't gotten around to read it yet. But I intend on reading it and trying to be objective about it. But from where I sit right now, I don't see any reason to think he doesn't exist. I think that, first of all, Paul's epistles say that he has a brother named James in Galatians 1:19. But then second of all, I don't see why the Gospels are, like why we should just say that they're unreliable.
Okay. So which one would you rather tackle first?
The Gospels, I guess.
The Gospels? Okay, well, so the one thing that makes the Gospels unreliable is that compared to other works that supposedly attest to historical figures, the Gospels don't cite historical sources for its information. It doesn't have any kind of citation in there other than scriptures. It cites all the Gospels cite scriptures throughout each of their writings, and so there's no way to actually anchor the Gospels in history, considering that they seem to only use scripture in order to validate the story that they're telling.
Doesn't the Gospel of Luke say in the beginning that, like, he's saying, like, hey, Theophilus, I'm writing this letter. Doesn't he say that he's talked to people and has verified this account? And isn't the Gospel of Mark based on the teachings of Peter, who was an eyewitness?
No, that is an assumption made by later church fathers with no actual evidence behind it to support it. None of the Gospels talk about who wrote them. While Luke's does say that he talked to other people, Luke was writing in the 90s, so at the very end of the first century. So even if Luke is being truthful there about who he talked to, he doesn't actually name anybody that he talked to, name his sources, which is completely contradictory to how any history is written in the ancient world. And two, Luke doesn't name himself in it. Like, we don't know that Luke wrote that particular thing, but since we can't actually anchor Luke in any kind of actual historical citation, him just saying that he talked to a bunch of people is not. It's not very compelling to say that it's a reliable sort of history. Not only that, but Luke actually used both Matthew and Mark in order to generate his story. So, I mean, there's a lot of sources that do go into Luke, which, it's being debated right now as to whether or not Luke used like Homer as well as Josephus in order to write Luke Acts. So, in any case that you go with the Gospels, they're just simply not anchored in actual history. They're only anchored in Scripture.
I guess there's a couple things to respond to. First of all, I know that there are the writings of Papias, which are like 125 AD, which that's pretty early on, that says that that attributes it to Mark. I know that Irenaeus attributes it to all the gospel writers traditionally. But also you said that the Gospel of Luke was written in the year 90, and I've studied that. As far as I've seen, there's no evidence that the Gospel of Luke was written that late. I think it was probably written much earlier, around the year 60.
Why do you assume that? The reason for the dating is because Luke obviously uses Matthew, who is writing in the 80s, and technically I said 90s. I think it's more likely that he actually wrote after 93 AD, like much after, like 93 AD could have been the earliest. I feel that Luke would have been writing his narrative, but I mean, the reason why we think that is because of the textual evidence of how Luke was written, how Luke used Josephus, how Luke used both Matthew and Mark and Paul. And so that puts it all in like right at the end of the first century.
Well, I think that to say that Luke is written year 90 because we know Matthew's written 80, and to say Matthew's written in year 80 because we know that Mark was written in the year 70. But as far as I know, the only evidence that Mark was written in the year 70 is that it predicts the temple was destroyed. And so therefore, since Jesus can't predict the future, the Gospels have to be written after the event it predicts. So it seems like to say that they're not reliable because they're written late is a circular argument. You're saying Jesus can't tell the future, therefore the Gospels are written late, therefore they're unreliable. Therefore Jesus didn't exist. You know what I mean?
I mean, I can understand that if that were the only reason why we think that Mark was written in 70 AD, but that's not the only reason why we think that. There's multiple different reasons as to why Mark was most likely written after 70
AD. Okay, let me pose my own argument for why they were written earlier. There's a couple things I could point to. But the book of Acts was written after the book of Luke, right? And Luke was written after Matthew and Mark. So the book of Acts builds up to like Paul's trial in Rome, and then the book doesn't finish. So that makes it seem like the book of Acts was written at the same time as the events that it was reporting. And the events that it was reporting happened in 62 AD, which shows us that Luke was written probably 61 AD and shows us that Matthew and Mark was written any time 60 AD or earlier. And also, well, I guess I'll just say one thing at a time. What do you think about that?
Considering that Acts is definitely historical fiction that was written much later, very obviously by his use of various different authors. And just the things that he talks about in Acts dates it to at the same like to the end of the first century. That's not really a compelling argument. Automatically assuming that Acts was written at the same time as Paul was writing or was living is not really substantiated in scholarship. But it's actually the majority scholarly position that Acts was written in the 90s. So, I mean, you're in the same position as I am as far as mythicism goes with your argument for Luke being dated that early.
What's my argument for Luke being dated early?
Well, your argument for Luke being dated early is that Acts seems to be talking about, Paul and his ministry.
Well, I'm not saying that we should just assume that it's written at the same time as the events it's talking about. I'm saying that it just cuts off. Like the story just cuts off, and So if it was written as late as the year 80, then why would the story just end right before the Great Fire in Rome? And why would it end right before Paul's trial in Rome? That really makes it seem like it's not a history, but it's rather like news of the modern day. And
why does any prequel, stop in general? Like, I guess I just don't understand why any like fan fiction that would have been written would have stopped before it interferes with the main source, or something like that. Like, I just don't see this as a very compelling argument, and really not so different to your recollection of how we date the Gospel of Mark.
Hey, I actually apologize. I have to go. My family's trying to. Do you know when the next time you're going to do this show is? Maybe we can continue the conversation.
Oh, we definitely can. I don't think it's going to be next weekend, but possibly the weekend after next. So 2 weeks from now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just have to go, man. But I could call on later. See ya.
Okay.
And thanks for taking my call.
No problem.
Bye.
Bye. All right. So that was fun. Some biblical reliability there. That was interesting. He also mentioned James, and I do have about 15 minutes. We could get a quick call in, if somebody wanted to talk about something really quick. Taco 5150's in the house. He says, "Hey, just joined. How's it going?" Pretty good there, Taco.
Not to spam this time, so I don't have to put them in timeout.
Yeah, Taco, watch the spamming in the chat there so that KC doesn't have to time you out there. But, huh?
That was Taco last night, right?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
I don't know what happened. I think I'm wondering if maybe it was just something on YouTube's end that spammed it or something. But in any case, so the last caller also brought up James, the brother of the Lord. The problem is that the actual use, or the actual word that Paul uses is adelphos, which that word itself is ambiguous as to whether or not it means blood brother or fictive kinship. So you really have to look at how Paul uses that word in other areas of his writings. And in other areas of his writings, he uses that same root word in different forms to reference fictive kinships rather than blood kinship. And so when you take that into account, it makes it more likely, at least in my view, that James was talking about a fictive kinship more so than a blood relative. So anyways, so tonight, what we have is I'm going to be going through the video that we were supposed to be going through last night, which we seem to have a pretty solid stream today. Hopefully tonight it won't be bad or anything, and we can actually have a live stream. What we'll be doing is going over the same video that we did last night, which I should probably go ahead. I've got the live stream created. It's just not set to public yet, which I'm setting it to public now. So tonight we are going to be having that video. We're going to be going over that. We're going to be going over the Skeptic Mafia comments. So if you joined the Skeptic Mafia recently, you want to leave a comment, go to the community tab, leave a comment on the community post, not on the original video. So go there, do that if you want to. We're going to be doing it at the same time as last night, 8:30 p.m. Central. So that's a little less than 4 hours from now. So, yeah, Lisa for Truth, you mean you tried to do? Yes, I tried to do. So tonight we're going to be talking about, what it means for good people to go to hell in Christianity. So I think I'll probably go ahead and end the show on the call-in studio. I'm going to end the show since we don't have anybody else calling in. Confirm and end show.
We are sorry, but the show has ended. Goodbye.
Oh, shit. The show is ended. Fuck me. Okay. Anyways, it was really nice hanging out with you guys today. I'm really enjoying this whole call-in thing. We had really great callers, starting off with Jim Tanker and then Lisa for Truth, and then we got some people that were critical of the mythicist position. So definitely smash that like button if you enjoyed today's call-in show. I'm probably going to be cutting up some of these sections here to put up as their own videos, if you guys will join us tonight, we're going to be reviewing a video, and I guess I'll see you guys in about 4 hours or so. So I'll see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.